Only 3 years ago, LA Modern Percussion was just an idea. A dream project that I quite frankly never thought would become a reality. From those early days up until now, the concept behind the project hasn't changed. The idea has always been to provide fully produced, cinematic drum sounds that bring you something as close as possible to what we hear in our favorite film scores. With the help of Alan Meyerson, some of LA's best percussionists, and the sound of Warner Bros. Eastwood Stage, I think we accomplished what we set out to do. But what if we could take this idea even further? What if in addition to these incredible drum sounds, you could also create fully produced percussion arrangements, entirely playable, dynamic grooves, all within Contact? With an additional set of noise-reduced samples, all new creative content, and the powerful custom groove engine, we've been able to take this library to all new heights. After many months of hard work, I'm proud to finally bring you the long-anticipated update to the world's finest percussion library. Hey guys, this is Oliver Codd, and today I'm going to walk you through the LA Modern Percussion update. It's been months and months and months since we started working on this thing, but I am absolutely thrilled with how it turned out, and I'm even more thrilled to show you guys what it's all about. So let's just dive in, and I'm going to start with this groove that I built based on one of the demos I made for the original LA Modern Percussion launch. I kind of wanted to see if I could replicate that all within Contact, so let's dive in. So I'm liking how that's sounding, but it was really important to us that we were able to create something that went beyond just creating loops. We wanted to have essentially an instrument at our fingertips that we could control dynamically and have access to individual instruments in the sequence. So you'll see here I've got this mod control activated. And basically what I have is all of the different instruments routed to the mod wheel. So let's take a listen to what that sounds like. All right, so as you can hear, I mean, that's getting a lot more interesting than just the same exact sequence playing through every single time. I mean, that is a real performance. But we can take this idea even further. If you see here, we've got a key assign window. So if I wanted to have all of the low drums on one key, all of the mid drums on another, and all the high drums on another, I could do that. And if I wanted to split out every single instrument across the keyboard, I could do that as well. So it kind of just depends on your preference and perhaps the production in mind. But let's go ahead and listen to what that sounds like where I've got some of these drums split up on the keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and map one of the fills patches to another key. So we've got 3 keys, and I'm just going to kind of doodle around on this and see what kind of results we can get. It's really cool and extremely powerful. So let's just try and take this one step further and start splitting out the dynamic modulation to different CCs and see what kind of results we can get with that. So this guy on 2, this guy on 3. We've got each of these drums on 2 different faders, which I have on my keyboard. So we're getting like this back and forward motion going on. There's only so much I'm going to be able to do with 2 hands, but you can imagine, you know, 5 or 6 drums all on their own MIDI CC, and then you're taking automation within your DAW, and you're really just kind of creating this living thing. And I think that contributes a lot to a realistic performance. Something worth noting is that those looseness controls that we had for the multis will apply to the sequencer. So any of these settings you have will all carry over to the sequencer, which was important to us because I wanted to make sure that I could take any of the multis I built for the original LA Modern Percussion and they would translate perfectly over to the sequencer, which they do, which is great. The sequencer has the ability to load and save presets. So if I come across a pattern that I like and want to save for later or apply to, you know, any number of drums, I'll just click on save, call it whatever, Wonderdyne, and then I can load that back up on another patch. And there it is. But something worth noting is the fact that because we have actually created different sequencers per instrument type, so dynamic hits, traditional hits and rolls, fills, improvs, flams, etc., you can only save and load presets into like sequencer types. So the dynamic hits and the traditional hits share the same sequencer, but the other instrument types, or the other patch types rather, have different parameters. So that's just something to keep in mind, not only for your own naming structures or naming schemes, but you won't be able to save a dynamic hits sequence and load it into the fills, for example, which wouldn't really make sense anyway, and I'll show you why. So let's check out some of the different sequencer types. The dynamic hits and the traditional hits and rolls are fairly predictable. The steps will be controlling the velocity, and that's about it. The only difference between these 2 patch types is the fact that the traditional hits and rolls have the full round robins, whereas the dynamic hits don't. The flams are similar in the sense that the steps also control velocity. The only difference here is that we also have a control below, which allows you to select which of the 3 round robins is being played back. We found that having round robins for flams was cool in theory, but not necessarily all that useful, because oftentimes I want to have that consistent flam into the downbeat. And so, point being, we gave users the ability to lock on to 1 round robin from the sequencer. So that's that for those. Probably the most complicated sequencer of the entire set are the ones that we built for the fills patches. Rather than controlling velocity, the steps will actually assign which fill is being played back because we didn't capture those with dynamics. So if I play this back, you can see those steps are just choosing which fill gets played back. Now the red numbers at the bottom of the sequencer represent the offset time. So by default, all of the patches have a 40 millisecond offset, but in case you might want to shift that forward or back a little bit, we've given people the option to do so. And the reason for this is because while we did tighten the fills, we didn't tighten them so much that every beat is perfectly on grid, because that sounds a little bit mechanical and lifeless. So in the event that you play a fill and maybe one or two notes or one or two beats are hitting a little bit late or a little bit early, you can fine tune that with the red numbers below. The white numbers above are basically taking the fill performance and cutting the length short from the end. So if you just want to play the first half of a fill before it hits the next fill that you've assigned to the sequencer, you can do that. And I'll just play it for you so you have an idea of what I'm talking about. So let's take this one and shorten it. So if I take it all the way to the top, it's basically cutting out all except for the first beat. And again, this is just something that'll give you a little bit more control in how you sculpt those fills into your sequences. Something worth noting is that the decay of each of the fills is controllable by the release knob on the mod page. By default, it's set so that it should transition between the different fills pretty realistically and without any overlap. But if you do want some overlap, you can drag that up. So that's a creative decision. You may or may not want that. Sometimes it actually kind of sounds cool and adds to the energy to have this layered thing going on. But in most cases, at least for me, I prefer to just have it right about there. The final thing to note about the fills is that when they're not in sequencer mode, we have the ability to affect the start time of the fill by key switch. So if I play this fill, and I want it to start later in that sample, I can use those red key switches at the bottom. Okay. And once you assign that with the key switch and go back into sequencer mode, it will remember that move that you made. So if you select a fill and you had assigned a key switch to cut into that sample, it'll play it back exactly how you want it to. So the improv patches are similar to the fills, except the way that those were recorded and designed were essentially we had one long improvisational performance played out rather than these independent fill performances. And so what the sequencer is doing here is it's actually determining where you're starting in that long performance. So the higher up, the further into the performance you're playing. And again, the red numbers are adjusting the offset. And I will say that for the improvs, you're probably going to have a bit more of a loose performance compared to the fills. So as you can see here, I'm adjusting the offset almost 20 milliseconds because it sounded better that way. And in many cases, you'll just want to trust your ears rather than what you think you know is right. So that covers the majority of the features between the different sequencers, but something that'll be uniform between all of them is the fact that you've got up to 32 bars. You've got your rate selection up to 1/32 triplet, swing, and the key, again, assignable keys. And if you want, you can take a sequence and use MIDI capture to drag it into your DAW if you like it, but you prefer to tweak it in your DAW. That's an option too. All right, let's check out a few more of these grooves. Awesome. All right, let's take a listen to this now. Let's turn the speed up a little bit. All right, cool. Well, I would recommend checking out the website to hear more of the grooves kind of finessed. I just kind of wanted to give you guys an idea of what, you know, I could scrap together in real time while playing. But on the website, you'll be able to hear a lot more examples of the grooves. Basically, everything that I've played in this walkthrough video will be included in the update for free. The update is completely free, but we've released a groove pack which will be available separately to purchase. And I'd recommend it. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. We included an entirely new set of noise-reduced samples to go along with the update. We realized that, you know, if you're stacking many different microphone positions and you've got many different drums, that the noise floor can get a little bit excessive. So we pulled out enough noise that I feel like we addressed that issue. So basically, you'll be able to have both sets of samples, the original non-noise reduced and the new noise reduced ones. So you can either choose which one you like or you can keep both. It doesn't really matter. One thing I will say is that I would back up the original version of LA Modern Percussion before you do the update, especially if you created any presets or creative content like multis. I would hate for you to overwrite any of that content. So just make sure you're aware of that before you update. It's been awesome to finally get this thing out. Let me know if you have any questions. You can reach me anywhere really, but the best way to get a hold of me is at support@audioollie.com. All right, guys, see you later.